Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is with a great sense of honour that I stand for the first time to rise and speak in this House today. I know that there will be at least 658 people who will disagree with my contention that my own constituency of the cities of London and Westminster is the most prestigious of the constituencies here in the United Kingdom. But it is probably fair to say that for many, many people it is, of course, the place where so many of the great matters of history in the past, and I hope historical matters in the future, will have their part to play. I was brought up in, I was born initially in Germany, and then I was brought up in the home counties. So I first came to Westminster, to central London, when I was about 7 years old. And I remember the excitement I felt looking at the sights, looking at Buckingham Palace, at St Paul's Cathedral, and all the other great landmarks in my constituency. Little did I realise that less than 3 decades later I should be lucky enough to represent this constituency. And it is a particular joy for me, not least as I am, I believe, only the third youngest Member of Parliament for the City of London part in the last 160 years. And so I realise that it is quite a hard task that I have to follow, not least with Peter Brook, who has, of course, been the member for the past quarter of a century. Indeed, he was referred to earlier in a speech by the Right Honourable Gentleman for Holborn and St Pancras. And Peter, who, of course, will now go to the House of Lords, has been a great help to me in the 18 months since my selection as a candidate. Indeed, he's been a great servant, not only to my party, but to the country at large. And I think, as many of you will know, he has a particularly erudite manner that will be sadly missed, and I'm afraid will not be entirely replicated by myself in this House in the years ahead. But he also had an obsessive interest with two great things. One was election statistics, and the other one was, of course, cricket. And indeed, whenever he used to sort of wistfully talk about what it was like in Rawalpindi in 1935, you never knew whether you were going to get some arcane bit of test match trivia or whether he was going to recite some local election statistics that had taken place. But I know he will be sadly missed, and I only hope that I will be able to follow in his footsteps in as strong a way as I possibly can. One of the difficulties, of course, of representing Westminster is that there are a great number, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a great number of fellow members of this House who, of course, live within the confines of my constituency. And indeed, I was made very well aware of that only yesterday as I was going through the voting lobbies, when I was harangued by two of my colleagues who were complaining respectively about traffic calming and the various parking regulations, the strictly enforced parking regulations here in this part of London. I should perhaps point out that I have never been a councillor in the City of Westminster. However, my colleague and the Honourable Member for Huntingdon was until April a councillor here, so I think he is the person to whom you should put all of your complaints in future. But if I... absolutely. We all have, as we come to this House, a mix of different backgrounds, and I wanted, with your indulgence, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to say a little bit about mine and the reason that I have wanted to go into public life. My mother was born in the early months of the last World War in 1939 in a little village outside a large town called Breslau, which is now called Wrocław, which I'm sure will cause some problems to Hansard later on, but which subsequently became part of Poland. And my grandfather, whom I barely knew, I was about 3 years old when he passed away. He was born exactly 100 years ago, and he grew up in the 1920s and 1930s in Germany at a time when politics was very much looked down upon by the ruling class. And he was a well-to-do Silesian family, and he became a doctor. And he, I think, regretted to his dying day that he had rather looked down on politics, as indeed had many others of his generation, because that really was the vacuum that let in, with a discredited Weimar Republic and the great economic crises in Germany of the 1920s. That was the vacuum that let in, to a large extent, National Socialism. So whenever people say to me that, well, politics doesn't matter very much, I, like many people here, I'm very, very concerned that there is that sense of apathy, and indeed, I think many of us will confirm during the recent weeks and months, of antipathy by many members of the electorate, and we have got to do our best to try and re-engage them. So that was my own family background, and I think, as I say, my grandfather grew up, and he regretted. My mother, in fact, was twice a refugee by the age of 15, fleeing first from Breslau to Leipzig, and then finally from east to West Berlin before the days of the Berlin Wall. And it was always instilled in me from a very young age that politics is really far too important to be left to someone else. And I'm a great believer in the words of Edmund Burke, who was a great Tory philosopher, when he said that for evil to prevail really requires no more than for good men to do nothing. I will say a few words, if I may, about the constitutional reforms of recent years, because I believe that my party was all too timid in the post-1997 era, particularly in relation to what was going on at the other place. And the reforms for the House of Lords were, in my view, a botched and very partisan set of reforms. Obviously, we now look and we will see what is to come with the second stage of those reforms. However, my personal belief now is that we have very little choice. We cannot turn the clock back. We should perhaps, in my view, have defended the status quo more robustly than we did during the period immediately after 1997. But I actually now take the view that, and it'll be a rare use of words, that I agree with the Liberal Democrat policy on this. I do believe we now need to move to a fully elected second Senate. But of course there will be, as will be rightly pointed out by other members, there will be great concerns as to how a fully elected House of Lords will be able to intermesh with an elected House of Commons. And these, I'm afraid, will be the concerns that we all have to face because of the ill-thought-out constitutional reforms. My great political hero is Andrew Bonar Law, and he, in fact, entered this place at the first general election of the last century. It is quite a salutary lesson. He came into this House really having two things in mind. One was the preservation of the empire. He was, in fact, Canadian initially. The other was the idea that Ireland should remain united. And by the time in 1922 that he became Prime Minister, in a sense, the past had been lost on both of those main issues. And it is a salutary lesson, potentially, I hope not, for many of us on this side of the House who have entered as Eurosceptics, feeling very strongly about the idea of the importance of our nation. And I have a great concern, obviously, that things will move in a particular direction that will not, in our view, at this juncture at least, be favourable over the years ahead. And I look also at the issue, dare I say it, of Scottish devolution, because, again, perhaps too much has been made on our side of the House, and I'm only sorry that the Right Honourable Member for Banff and Buchan isn't here, because what I'm about to say, I suspect, will warm the cockles of his heart. But I feel that we have made a lot of this idea of English votes for English laws, when really the real issue should be Scottish taxes for Scottish expenditure. And by the dint of a mere 74-vote majority, we have my honourable friend for Galloway and Upper Liddesdale as the sole Scottish Member of Parliament. But I think we as Conservatives have got to face facts. It is the case that in the last 10 years, at each of the last two general elections effectively, barely 1 in 6 members of the Scottish electorate have voted in favour of unionist parties. We now see a particular path that this government goes down. I have great worries because I think they have dismantled the equilibrium of the United Kingdom, and that will be difficult to bring back into play. And I foresee, and maybe I'll be proved wrong, I'm not necessarily the best of predictors, it should be said, because I was telling most of my constituency association, or those of them who wish to hear at the weekend, that I didn't think that my right honourable friend, the member for Rushcliffe, was going to be entering the fray for Tory leader. So you must take that prediction with that in mind. But I do foresee that the prospect of effectively two distinct power blocks within the Scottish Parliament. On the one hand, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party. On the other, the Scottish Nationalists, in bed possibly with the Conservatives, who will be no longer a unionist party within Scotland. And that, I think, will be a great challenge in the years ahead. And as I say, my great concern is that Labour have not really, the government have not really thought through this, what they call the modernisation agenda, and they are being blinded, in my view, to many, many of the difficulties that will come as a part of this. So, finally, I can see my time is almost up now, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beseech this government to tread carefully when it comes to constitutional matters, and may I thank you for allowing me to address these crucial matters, on which I know I will have much more to say in the years ahead. Thank you. Yeah.